as, you know, I rail against Zoom, and I have a love-hate relationship with Zoom. One of my favorite things is when the waiting room opens. Hi, Lori. And like everybody pours in. It's like everybody comes into the party. There's some kind of rush I get out of that. Call me weird.
I love it too.
Welcome, everyone.
All right, folks are starting to really come in now. Awesome. I see a lot of people connecting to their audio.
I knew I was going to be sorry. I had the window open. I'm going to go close it. Neighbor lawn care. Poorly timed, always.
Oh yeah, my husband arranged for us to have a tree limb taken down that's over top of the office. And he came in one night and said, okay, the guys are going to be here at 7:30 tomorrow morning to take that tree limb down. I said, well, I'm going to be on a client call at 8, so let's redo that. Luckily, they had some flexibility.
Much better to reschedule rather than force them to rush when they're climbing up the trees. And
yes, definitely. So great to see all these names. Franklin's back. Hi, thanks for joining us again. You see, I always hesitate to call people out because they're coming in so fast and furious. It's hard to see them before they zip by. All right, well, we are a minute over, and because I think, let's go ahead and get started, Andrea, or do you want to give folks another minute?
Let's go.
Hey, Stephen, thanks for coming in. Jeremy, great to see you. All right. By the way, Andrea, you're managing the slides, right?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not in charge. So thank you all for joining us today. We're very excited to have you here. My partner and friend and mentor and one of my very own trusted advisors, Andrea Howe, is going to speak to us today about how to influence a skeptical audience in 3 simple steps. We're going to go ahead and get started into this. Go to the next slide. Just a few things before we get started for you to be aware of. First is that this webinar is being recorded. You'll receive a link to the recordings and additional resources after the webinar. Probably will send that out on Thursday. So watch your inbox for those resources. Today's presentation is longer than our typical monthlies. Andrea has so much great advice to give, and I love her webinars. They're so interactive. So today we'll do a 45-minute presentation and then have 15 minutes at the end for questions and answers. As we go through, go ahead and submit any questions or comments you have via chat. I will be monitoring that chat feed, and if something's pressing that doesn't feel like it can wait for the Q&A session, I'll go ahead and pop in with Andrea to get those questions up. Join us for cameras on and cameras off if you're game. So I know right now we all started with the cameras off. Andrea is going to be inviting you throughout the session to turn your cameras on, turn your cameras off. It's one more way of showing some engagement. So listen for her cues as we go along. And then in addition to the cameras on and off, we'll be using the chat feature, polling feature, some annotations possibly throughout the presentation. So get engaged and most of all, enjoy the next hour. So go ahead. Just for those of you who maybe this is your first time joining us, quick little bit about Trusted Advisor Associates. TrustedAdvisor.com is a wealth of resources for you on the topic of trust. We've spent the last 20 years helping business professionals build stronger trust relationships. All of our material is based, or most of our content is based on the 3 books, The Trusted Advisor, which we just released the 20th anniversary edition, Trust-Based Selling, and the Trusted Advisor Fieldbook, which was co-authored by Andrea and the Trusted Advisor Associates founder, Charlie Green. With that, I'm going to do one thing that I should have done at the very beginning, and that's to say, hi, I'm Noelle Michaelenko. I'm the CEO of Trusted Advisor Associates, and welcome. I'm super excited to have you here. Andrea, over to you.
Thank you, Noelle. My first question for all of you, and it's an important one. My question is, how are you? Like, for real, no kidding. Tell us the truth as we begin, just so we get a baseline, know where we're all starting from, get a little bit of music to help us focus on the chat. Please chat your replies now. So thank you all for your candid replies, a wide range, which is completely to be expected on any given day, but especially on this particular day in the year 2021. I'm glad I didn't see skeptical as something listed. So we're off to a good start, and at least I'm in a pretty good place in that regard, since we are talking about how to deal with a skeptical audience. I totally forgot to chat in my reply. I got so immersed in reading all of yours. By the way, sorry about the 2 torn rotator cuffs. Ouch. I would say eager would be my word for 2 reasons. One is I'm eager to see what you all think about and how you react to this content I've put together today. The core of it isn't new from what I've taught in the past, but I've brought in some new examples and stories, and I'm testing some things out. So we'll see how that goes. I'm also eager to find out this time, how many slides, too many, did I build into the deck this time? So time will tell. Now is a good time. We've done the how are you. I want to do a little bit on who are you. So if you're not already set up in gallery view in the upper right hand corner of your Zoom screen, now's a great time for that. If you are able to come on camera, even if you don't want to be on camera much, my invitation is to just pop on, at least for a moment, so that we can see some faces. Wave hello to everyone. Hello, hello. Beautiful. I'm scrolling through. So nice to see all of you. Now let's do a little cameras on, cameras off, and I've got a Zoom pro tip for you. If you don't already have your Zoom set up to hide non-video participants, now's a good time to do that. And you would know if in gallery view, like you see Andrea's iPad as like a blank thumbnail, and you can go to any one of those blank thumbnails in the upper right hand corner, click on the dots, and then it allows you to hide non-video participants from there. That will sort of clean up your visual field as we're doing this webinar. So now what I want you to do is to stay on camera. If this is your first ever Trust Matters webinar, and if camera's not available to you today, you can also use the reaction tools to let us know. Stay on if this is your first ever Trust Matters webinar. Everybody else pop off camera. We're practicing cameras on, cameras off. Quite a few of you. A big, big warm welcome to all of you. Now let's do the reverse. If you've been on a Trust Matters webinar before, whether it was led by me or somebody else, come on camera, everybody else off camera, and we can see who you are. I just saw you waving, Kelsey. Hello. Now my cursor has disappeared. It's always there, it goes. Okay, good. So welcome back to all of you. Now let's do cameras on. If you've ever attended what I'll call like a full-blown workshop of ours, either led by me or one of our associates, everybody else cameras off. So nice. Yes, welcome to all of you. Beautiful. Now, what I'm going to invite you to do for now is all cameras off. Give your eyes a break. Give yourself a break from looking at yourself. I don't know about you, but I'm so tired of looking at myself on screen. And I'll invite you back on in just a little bit. And I will say, if you have a burning question or comment that you feel like it really can't wait, it's distracting you so much from the presentation, by all means, put it in chat. But if you want to, go ahead, crash the party, come on down, just turn your camera on, and we'll pause right there and take whatever it is that you want to talk about. Now, I titled this presentation very specifically for a reason. We are talking here today about influence, which in and of itself is challenging, but the specifically unique challenge of dealing with an audience that's skeptical or hesitant or resistant or doubting. And I touted that we could do this in 3 simple steps. That's kind of like my clickbaity title for you. So that's the good news, is that the steps really are simple in my view for how best to deal with this. The bad news is that simple doesn't mean easy. And it actually does take some intentional effort, and it takes a willingness, as with all things trust building, to take some risk. One of the reasons it's not easy to influence a skeptical audience is because of our own reactions. I mean, let's be real. It's, deflating, frustrating, challenging for us to deal with people who seem dubious or doubtful in the face of our great ideas, our great products, or great services, in the face of our brilliance. So I want to get a little bit of a pulse check here just to see what's it like for you. Tell me the truth. How does it feel when you're met with that? Somebody who's dubious or doubtful. We're going to use the annotation feature of Zoom. If you're able to do that, chat's always a good backup if you can't. As a reminder, you get to the annotation toolbar by dropping down the little menu by the green bar at the top where it says you're seeing Andrea Howe's screen, and then there's an annotate function and it releases the, yeah, perfect. Some of you have already got the hang of it. So we got 30 seconds of music here. Turn our attention. Where are you? Anywhere ranging from shut down to energized, anywhere in between, and all of the above. Thank you all for weighing in. I have so much admiration for those of you who are on the higher end of the spectrum and the intrigued, or maybe even leaning towards energized. I hover where you all, most of you, have landed, somewhere between annoyed and deflated or lethargic, if I'm perfectly honest. And the reason I asked this question is because I realized in preparing my content around these 3 simple steps, I realized there's actually a prep step. There is what I'm going to call a step 0. And step 0 is to actually practice celebrating whenever somebody resists your ideas or your products or your services. And that might seem like a strange thing to suggest, but the reason I suggest that is because at least inside of their resistance lies some energy. So consider the far worse alternative of dealing with an ambivalent audience where there is 0 energy. So even though I feel confronted by it, I don't feel necessarily good about their skepticism. It's almost like working a martial art. Martial artists learn how to work with, it's not a great analogy because they work with their opponent's energy. And we want to be careful not to be viewing our skeptical audiences as our opponents, but what's apt is to figure out how to take the energy and move with it and work with it. So if you think step 0 is crazy, actually celebrating their skepticism or their resistance, wait till you see this one. So my step 1 recommendation is to do what I call putting your worst foot forward. Now, I put this in quotes very intentionally. I don't exactly mean it literally. There is a little dramatic effect in the way that I've put language around this. But what I do mean is for you to lead with something other than your positivity, your enthusiasm, your compelling justifications for whatever your point of view is, and instead to actually dwell a bit and to consider leading with what I'll just call, for lack of a better term, the negative stuff. In other words, the downsides, the cons, the challenges, maybe your own weaknesses, maybe even leading with your organization's weaknesses. Now, this for sure is not what I was taught in the early days of my career. I started as an IT consultant. I was taught, you never want to hurt your credibility by showing your weakness. And there are, in fact, let's be honest, there are some downsides to putting your worst foot forward. So let's actually do a little bit of brainstorming about that. Let's do another chat. If you don't have access to chat, jot down some notes for yourself. Why might putting your worst foot forward or leading with the negative stuff actually potentially be a bad idea? Great answers. Whoops. Stop the music. I thought it was stopping there. So you are all so right on target. Everything you say is a valid concern, from maybe setting a negative tone in the conversation to hurting your credibility, to appearing defensive, to compromising the impression that you're making, losing your audience, maybe, tipping them off, as Noelle, you say, to something they hadn't thought of yet. So you're actually seeding their negativity rather than addressing their negativity. So what else did I have on my list? Lots of ways it could backfire. It can also feel just weird or wrong, or, and sort of get you off in an then you're not starting on solid ground, and that could compromise your entire interaction. Now, all of these things said, so yes, 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 and yes, true to all of these potential risks. If you're open to it, I would like to add some additional perspectives into this mix about why it's potentially a good idea to put your worst foot forward. In fact, what I would assert is that doing this is an unexpected way to open a conversation or a presentation that is unexpectedly effective, in part due to something known as the Sarek effect. Now, I did not make up the Sarek effect. I first learned about it in a book by Adam Grant called Originals. It is named after a social scientist named Leslie Sarek. In the book, Adam Grant illustrates the Sarek effect by telling a story. I'll give you the very, very brief version. The story is a couple, once upon a time, started up an online magazine and blog network for parents. And early into their venture, they realized they needed a round of capital. So when they were doing their pitches to try to raise funding for their business, they actually started their presentations with the top 5 reasons you should not invest in our company. They got $3.3 million worth of funding in their first round. That's US dollars. 2 years later, they were exploring the opportunity of selling. They had a chance to pitch to Disney. They did something similar. They said, here's why you don't want to actually buy our company. They sold their company for $40 million to Disney. Now, here's how the Sarek effect makes sense of all this, because on the surface, it doesn't really make any sense. And it maybe even feels like, like a little gimmick or a forced manipulative technique. And we all know, by the way, let's just stipulate right here and right now, that if we're doing something for the sake of being manipulative or tricky or applying some technique to get others to bend to our will, we are not, in fact, leading with trust. We're leading with high self-orientation, rather than low. So the Sarek effect basically says that when you're presenting a new or novel idea, when you're suggesting change, when there is the risk that your audience is going to be skeptical, it's actually best to accentuate your flaws. And there are 4 reasons in particular. The first being that it's disarming when you do that. Think about it. Think about how we all feel when we get the sense that somebody's trying to persuade us of something that we're not sure we want to be persuaded of. You know, Charles Green has always said, we all love to buy, but hate to be sold. So naturally, you know, our shields go up, and accentuating flaws has the effect of not pushing against the shield, but actually, like a picture, coming around to the side of the shield that they're on, looking at it together, exploring together, which therefore has the effect of lowering the shield. It's also a way, interestingly, to create allies. So you shift the dynamic in the engagement from trying to persuade them to adopt your idea to giving them a problem to solve. Ideally, something that you might even be able to solve together. The third dimension of the Sarek effect is it can actually make you look smart. It shows that you're being thoughtful, not just about your shortcomings, yes, but also about where your audience may be coming from. What are their perspectives, their points of view, their reasons for being concerned? And here's the interesting paradoxical thing. It actually has the effect of building their confidence in you rather than hurting their confidence and hurting your credibility. So let's just look at some examples that I've pulled together that I think illustrate the Sarek effect really nicely. In particular, illustrate putting your worst foot forward. I want to start with an ad campaign that was developed by the tourism board for the state of Nebraska with the help of an advertising agency in Colorado. They were trying to address the fact that for 4 years in a row, they were voted the very last state in the United States that anybody wanted to visit. Bottom, like absolute last on the list. So they created an ad campaign that started with the slogan, Nebraska, honestly, it's not for everyone. Consider a different example. This is an excerpt of a bio from the author of a book on meditation, Dan Harris, which like his bio intentionally accentuates his flaws. He calls himself out as a fidgety, skeptical newsman who had a panic attack live on Good Morning America. He also then attempts to align with anyone who thinks or has ever thought negatively about meditation. He says this led him to something he always thought was ridiculous, meditation. Let's look at another example. This is a blog post authored by a woman named Rita Handrick. Before she retired, she was a licensed psychologist and an expert in jury persuasion. So in this article that she wrote with a very clever title, Simple Jury Persuasion, you may want to disagree with this post, she asserts, although somewhat paradoxical, giving people the freedom to resist your message appears to undermine their wish to do so. This is apparently as true for juries as it is for anybody in a professional realm. And this is completely consistent with a mnemonic device that I created in the Trusted Advisor Fieldbook called the 3 Ps of Trust, which aims to capture some fundamental lessons about the dynamics of how trust building works. It's personal, paradoxical, positively correlated to risk. Putting your worst foot forward actually specifically speaks directly to the second 2. And there is no doubt that it comes with risk, but because trust is positively correlated to risk, that means trust is the possible payback. Plus, there's something to consider in the bigger picture, which is sometimes the biggest risk is not to take a risk. Sometimes a bigger risk than getting off on the wrong foot or leaving a bad first impression or appearing defensive. Sometimes the bigger risk is to leave your audience stuck, or maybe even worse, to drive them lower to being more ambivalent. Now, to some of the points that you all brought up in chat, how you do this absolutely matters. So I think of like this sort of magical elixir, if you will, of humility combined with confidence. And it's key to bring the confidence into the picture when you do it, to state boldly, maybe even a little bit loudly, what the weaknesses or the concerns are not to speak those with your own hesitation or your own sense of doubt creeping in, because how you deliver that message matters greatly in terms of how it is received. Now, this is simple, not easy for sure. Let me see, how are we doing? So I do have time. I'm curious if anybody has had a positive experience of leading with your weaknesses or leading with the downsides, and you're game to come on camera and just talk with me about it for a minute. Anybody ever had a positive experience of doing this? You could also just come off mute if you don't want to be on camera. Oh, this is where, right, I gambled, took the risk that somebody would join me. Oh, yay, Sandra.
I'll throw one for you.
Is it Sandra or Sandra?
Sandra.
Sandra.
So I was in the vaccine center at one of the clinics that I work in, and I accidentally used this yesterday or last Friday. I had no idea it was a thing, but yay. A lady brought in her teenager who was definitely getting vaccinated. She gave verbal consent, said, I'm just a little on the fence yet. I'm going to get one, just not yet, not today. I'm like, oh, do you have some concerns? I'm not a doctor, I'm not a nurse, but I do support the vaccine stuff. So is there anything I can help you? And so using that, I am not a clinical professional, even though I have other credentials that don't matter in this situation.
Right.
That was kind of that same mode. And I got her to reconsider a little bit more, and she told me the video she watched looked really hoaxy, but it really made her think. So not trying to be political, because it's a health risk, but was able to maybe bring her along and tell her the differences between the types of vaccines and talk her through it. And she must have said something to the nurse, because the nurse came out and said, who are you? You sounded really smart to that lady. And she was really reconsidering, and I need to get to know you. So
very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's a perfect illustration, and I appreciate that you met her where she was, which leads into our step 2 coming up in just a moment. But I think what you said was really key, Sandra, is that you didn't lead with, chest beating, I'm an expert. You didn't lead with, here are all the compelling reasons to do it. You weren't pushing her anywhere. You came, not from like this kind of dynamic, but a more open and relaxed exchange where you were just kind of like an everyday person willing to engage her in a conversation.
Yep. And she also kept saying she needed to do research. And I'm like, well, here's some great websites. Go to the CDC, go to the state. If you want to look, you don't have to listen to me. It's okay. Go do the research in the right places. And that was actually helpful too.
Nice. So you've done a perfect tee up for me. Thank you. We didn't plan this in advance. Let's just be clear. A perfect tee up for the next step. So as a quick recap so far, we've got, Andrea, remember to share your screen again so everybody can see what you're seeing. We've got celebrating, putting your worst foot forward. Now let's see what kind of craziness step 2 has in store. Step 2 is once you've done those things and you get your mouse to work, you actually acknowledge and potentially even amplify. And what I mean is their negativity. So there are a couple of key ways to do this. The first is to find a way, what I mean by acknowledge is to find a way to express that their negative reactions make a certain kind of sense, which you can literally do with the words that make sense. They're like a favorite triplet of words that I have in my trusted advisor toolkit, which by the way, or there are other ways to basically validate their perspective. And let's be clear, you can absolutely do that even when you don't agree. You don't have to agree to acknowledge that looking at something from the perspective of somebody else, you could see how they see what they see. So let's look at how our role models have done this, have done the equivalent of that makes sense. So here's a quote, it's a little bit edgy and humorous, but it's from Dan Harris, the news person who's the author of the meditation book. It's a quote of his from the press release that's announcing the new app. And it's really a clever way of relating to his target audience. He's saying, in effect, that makes sense, but from the I. He says, I always assumed meditation was basically for the people who wear patchouli, collect Cat Stevens records, play ultimate frisbee, and use the word namaste without any irony. Now, to be clear, his target audience are those who are skeptical about meditation, not those who are already bought into it. And then he actually continues. He says, I also thought it would be utterly impossible for somebody like me who has the attention span of a 3-month-old golden retriever. Let's look at our jury experts example. So she says, she actually recommends in the opening statement that lawyers say things like, you may find you want to disagree with our side. Now, they do a little bit of a transition into what I'm going to call out as step 3 with her next recommendation. We ask that you listen to the whole story and then choose which side you agree with. But before we get to step 3, there's another really compelling example from the technology world where Steve Jobs actually masterfully acknowledges what I'm going to call a pretty hostile participant. It's like an open Q&A from the 1997 Apple Worldwide Developers Conference. And, the participant comes up to the microphone and starts with, Mr. Jobs, you're a bright and influential man. Everybody laughs because there's a sense that, there's a big but coming. And he moves on to say, actually, you don't know what you're talking about. And he said a couple other, what I would consider relatively, potentially unkind, but certainly provocative things. And how Jobs responds, you can find this on YouTube if you want. It, to me, is fascinating. So he takes a breath and he says, makes a little joke, you can please some of the people some of the time. But then what he does is he pauses for a really, really long time. I actually counted it. It was 8 seconds. And you imagine somebody's just asked you a semi-hostile question, kind of attacked you when you're on stage in front of hundreds of people. 8 seconds is a long time. So he pauses and then he says, one of the hardest things when you're trying to affect change is that people like this gentleman, and then he pauses again and he says, all right. And he goes on to completely validate the perspective. And in fact, he even validates the questioner, the participant made the suggestion that one of the reasons he didn't know what he was talking about is because he hadn't been developing any software for the last 7 years. And Jobs acknowledged that was absolutely right. And that was potentially put him in a compromised position, or certainly a different position than where the audience member was coming from. So I think this is a really powerful example of acknowledging somebody's perspective, acknowledging their point of view. Now, there are cases when you might use these steps in a presentation format where you don't necessarily get a lot of feedback. And there are times when you might be able to use these when you have an opportunity for dialogue. And the other triplet of words that I really like in that case are the words, tell me more. In other words, you want to draw them out. What else are you concerned about? And what are the implications of that? And what else do you see from your perspective? And why else shouldn't we do this idea? And you might even build on, that's what I mean by amplify. You could say, well, and you know what about this? This is also potentially another concern, all with humble confidence and with an underlying commitment to really, it's the Stephen Covey, the father, can't remember which initial he has as his middle initial. It's Stephen R, not MR, from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People from many, many years ago, seeking first to understand, being on their side, being, stepping around the guard that they have is up, join them on the same side of that guard and see what you can discover together. So this meets our objective. One of our objectives for today was to give you some specific ways to listen masterfully when their guard is up. Remember the words, or at least the attitude, that makes sense, and tell me more. Now, some of you are probably eagerly thinking, well, okay, all this nice is great, but when do I get to make my case? I'm really enthusiastic about my product, my service. my idea, when is it my turn? And the short answer to that question is when you've gauged that you've done enough work for them to be open to hearing you. And that's when you follow step 3, which is pivot to your point of view. And step 3 is actually relatively easy if you've done 0 through 2 relatively well. So let's see how our role models do it. Some cool examples here. We've got Dan Harris saying, but then I saw scientific research that says all these benefits of meditation, despite its public relations problem, it's actually a simple, secular, and largely scientifically validated exercise for your brain. Do you see how he's done that? How he's brought you along into seeing the benefits? Our jury persuasion expert recommends that the opening statement continue with, look, we think our side is harder to explain, but ultimately correct. We've got Steve Jobs, who shortly after acknowledging his hostile participant transitioned to saying, one of the things I've always found, you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology, not the other way around. Now, if you're not sure about exactly what is the right timing for when you can do this, when is it too soon in particular? If you're in dialogue, one of the things you can do is you can ask their permission. You could say something like, you could recap all the concerns, all the skepticism, re-emphasize, I can really see where you're coming from. I understand and appreciate that point of view. If you're open to it, I have some additional information that I think would be helpful to add to the big picture and help us all or help you make a better decision in the long run. And you test and you see, do they say, okay, do they really mean it? Or do they say, yeah, okay, I'm open to hearing what you have to say. And the phenomenon of reciprocity, which we've talked about often, in our programs before, comes into play here, the tendency to return a gesture. If you've done a really good job of listening to them, the chances are far greater, in fact, they're actually pretty good, that they will then be willing to listen to you. So we've got our summary here of the 3 steps with our bonus prep step, or step 0. If you want to screen grab, you'll be getting all these slides as part of your package, but if you wanted to screen grab this is a good screen grab opportunity. This also is, by the way, a good chance, if you have not stretched since we started, we're 36 minutes in, if you can stand up and do a little moving around, please do. If you can't, you can at least roll your shoulders, give yourself a little side stretch, take a nice long deep breath, look away in the distance and blink your eyes. Give yourself a Zoom break so we don't all become zombies. I'm going to pause and now ask you, with that little moment of refreshment, for what we've done so far, what's your biggest takeaway so far? Oh, and I forgot I have music. If you would please chat, what's your biggest takeaway? Such a nice range of responses from working the mindset. I really appreciate, I saw somewhere, it's new but not surprising. A lot of the most compelling trust building principles are exactly that, new and not surprising. Jeremy, you're calling out the value of self-deprecating humor. Yeah, and thank you for somebody else, was it you? Somebody else called out the value of using annotate. I saw a comment too about how this is especially effective with children. I'm wondering if anybody would be game to come on camera with me or just come off mute and talk to me about what you see in that regard, because there's so much we can learn. Maria, yeah, you're laughing. You're laughing on mute. I can see you laughing. I can't hear you.
Yes, yes, yes. When I think about, I think about, the work I do professionally, but also what I do with my children. And they are the biggest skeptics as far as, let's say, it's bedtime, right? Getting through the bedtime routine and trying to convince them that it is time to slow down and relax and rejuvenate. And literally using these simple steps also would be, I feel like I kind of do a version of this, not knowing that this is what I've been doing, but also great practice. It is my practice area.
Yes. Low stakes practice, right?
But also creating that, as everything is about building trust, then it just makes it easier for that next night of bedtime routine. And that maybe I don't have to go through the same exercise again with them, but putting this in my professional career and even in personal relationships, that it really helps validate that I see you, I hear you, and I'm arriving at that same place as you are, and not thinking that, hey, it's because I'm whoever, I'm so-and-so, I'm mommy, I'm senior, whoever.
Because I said so.
Absolutely. So just being, and it just keeps you humble in what you do. And my other comment was, I think everyone should take this session.
Thank you. Well, everyone will have access to the recording, even if you didn't register. So that's the good news. You can share that with your team. So, and certainly would be glad to do an encore anytime. Thank you for that. We're going to shift. I wanted to just underscore a couple things Maria said, Noelle, before we do our poll and our shift to Q&A. I know you found this to be true as much as I have, that one of the reasons this works with kids equally as well as adults is because it's human nature. And I've heard, we've both, I know, heard so many people get so much value out of the programs we teach, not just applying it in a professional setting, but applying the lessons at home. And Maria, fear not, you may have to repeat the cycle. You might have to repeat the steps, but what I'm betting will happen is you'll be able to cycle through them faster when you start with an acknowledgement, and then help shift them towards the inevitable because you do say so. It's the bottom line. So, yeah. So thanks for that.
Andrea, before we shift, I wanted to ask you, I noticed a few comments throughout the session. I've seen a number of references to self-orientation. And I'm wondering if you can take a minute and draw the connection between this technique and the impact it has on self-orientation, both for the speaker, the presenter, and for the audience.
Yeah, good one. So hold on, I'm just drawing the trust equation real quick so I can hold it up in case anybody isn't familiar with why are we talking about self-orientation. So this is what Charlie Green created with his colleagues in the original book, The Trusted Advisor. It is a definition basically of what to focus on when you are trying to boost your own trustworthiness, which is what the T stands for. Self-orientation is in the denominator, so we want that to be as low as possible, while also boosting our credibility, our reliability, and our intimacy. So the question, Noelle, was how does this relate to self-orientation, both for the presenter, the person with the influencer, let's call it, and the influencee? So first of all, the step 0 to celebrate is like the ultimate act in managing your self-orientation, as well being willing to maybe speak to the less positive sides of your idea or what you're proposing. That takes a certain level of groundedness, a focus on the other rather than a focus on worrying how you look, acknowledging them and really listening and drawing out. Again, self-orientation has to do with focus. Where is your attention? So that's an ultimate low self-orientation act, which will increase trust. Shoot, and there was one other thing I was about to say. The other thing that drives self-orientation, so it's about focus, has to do with where is your attention, but self-orientation also has to do with what your motives are, and are you saying or doing certain things that are truly in their best interests or in your best interests. And most of us are well-meaning, service-oriented people who don't intentionally do things in our own best interests, but we do things in our own best interests all the time. When we get frustrated or feel deflated because somebody's not open to our idea, we'll have a reaction, and we'll do things from a place of trying to preserve ourselves rather than really get in and understand others. So, and I think I talk about fear a lot and the way fear draws down on trust. I think one of the biggest impediments to following the steps, I'm going to put them back up real quick, to following the steps is being fearful. It's scary to do these things. And when we're operating from a place of fear, we're operating from a place of high self-orientation rather than low. So that was a long-winded answer for the influencer perspective. I think from the influencee perspective, when you are, again, when you're doing the get behind the, the guard, the shield, and work from the same side, you're actively helping them manage their own self-orientation, their own worries, fears, concerns. And as those decrease, they're going to be better and better able to really listen to you, and you'll be better able to have a thoughtful dialogue among people who are truly present rather than reactive. Good question. One day, no, I'm not. I was going to say one day I will learn how to answer questions succinctly, but you know what? That's not realistic. So let's should we officially do the poll, Noelle, so we can transition to like the Q&A portion?
Yeah, I think this is a good time to pause for that. So just as we're shifting in, if you could all take just a quick second, Vicki, go ahead and put the poll up. Let us know how valuable you found this time together so far. And for those of you who may be feeling like you need to jump off, maybe it's time to grab lunch or you've got to prep for another meeting, that's fine. I encourage those of you who can stay on to stay on, because my experience is that the next 15 minutes, the Q&A section, is going to be very valuable.
As people are posting their questions, or if you want to come on camera to just say them out loud, that's cool too. But I want to underscore, Nicholas, something I see in chat. I love what you say about the focus being making an informed choice. And I think that's one of the most compelling reasons to manage the self-orientation we naturally feel, the worry that we have that we're going to introduce negative thoughts, for example, by putting our worst foot forward, because ultimately, whether it's a client or a colleague or whoever the stakeholder is, what we want is an informed influencee. We want somebody making a choice that they're completely educated in, well-versed in, and that they can really commit to. There was a store when I was growing up. I grew up here in Maryland in the US. I don't know if it was an East Coast chain or if it was just Maryland, but it was a really popular clothing store when I was in high school. It was called Sims. And it was like, the sort of higher priced designer stuff, but at knockoff prices, excess inventory. And it was like a slightly fancier version of a Marshalls or a TJ Maxx. And they had a phrase, I don't remember exactly what it is, but it was something like, an educated consumer is our best customer. And I think that's true when it comes to influence and when it comes to building trust. Educated consumers really are our best decision makers, our best partners, our best collaborators. It was an East Coast chain. Thank you, Franklin, for clarifying that. Yeah, Sims. So your first suit at Sims, woohoo. But Mark, you're on the West Coast. Maybe you were on the East Coast once upon a time, or maybe it was more a national thing. Okay, so questions. Hi, Nicholas.
Hey, Andrea, good to see you again. I had a question about time, because one of the most challenging things dealing with a skeptical audience in most of our interactions professionally is that they're time bound. So in a sales conversation, for example, you have an hour to present, or you have 30 minutes of an executive's time. And all of the examples that you used, especially the Steve Jobs one, brought home to me that to really do this properly, you have to slow it all down. You have to stop. You have to acknowledge that there might be challenges. You have to hear out the other side, and then you have to pivot. I'd imagine people listening to this are going, oh, I'm getting super anxious because I've planned my presentation and now I have to slow the damn thing down.
Yeah, no, it's right. And it's a valid and understandable reaction. And yeah, you have to slow the damn thing down. I mean, it's one of those things is you look at what your trade-offs are. So the trade-offs are, if you don't slow it down, it's the sort of the old go slow to go fast. But if you don't do that, how much time does it take over multiple conversations to deal with the stuff that you didn't pause to deal with in the beginning? Or how much time do you lose because you lose your audience? And you never you got 30 seconds with the executive and you never get 30 seconds, 30 minutes, it feels like 30 seconds, and you never get another meeting. And when executives in particular, when anybody finds time to be of value, they're always going to extend the time. They may not be able to right now, but they'll say, I want to continue this. Let's find time to continue. Or they'll go tell their executive admin, you know what, cancel my 3 o'clock. We need to stay in this conversation. We've all had experience with that before when we've run conversations really well. So it's tough. It means good management, self-management, and being willing to take a risk that may pay off with, or is far more likely to pay off with far greater dividends.
Yeah. And maybe the reciprocality rule could kick in. If you do make time, the executive that you're presenting to might turn around and reciprocate with extra time for you. That's a good way to look at it.
Exactly. You could also list, you could start with, look, if I were in your shoes, here are the 5 things I'd be most concerned about in terms of working with us. How close are we here? Let's vet this list. And the executive, she might say, I'm really only concerned about 2 and 3. Great, let's start there. Noelle, you popped in, but I also saw Mara.
Yeah, I just wanted, because it's irrelevant. It's relevant to what Nicholas just said. Sandra popped up in the chat and suggested do your homework and prep ahead of time.
Yeah.
What questions they may have. And so I think that speaks to you that some of the slowing down may be done a little bit before the meeting comes in, so that you're not addressing things
on the
from
fly.
a place of being surprised.
Yeah, well said. Mara from Toronto, hello.
Hi, Nicholas, we're in Toronto as well. It's actually a slight follow-on from Nicholas, but another question. The time was a concern of mine as well. And so if the second meeting happens, another day, do you have to kind of restart up again with the 3 steps, or have you already built that trust and able to now pivot to your point of view, do you think?
It's a good question. And what comes to mind for me first, Mara, is it kind of depends where you left off, and maybe even where you left off and where you sense you're starting again. And if it's a meeting where you're actually having dialogue and can engage, you could ask, where we left off,
Right.
we covered this and these concerns. Is there more on that we need to address before we look at the other sides, and just see what they say. And
then, yeah, okay, that's good. Sorry, the other question I had was if you're presenting to a number of people, they may have some people who already aren't skeptics. So does leading with your worst foot forward affect their opinions?
It's a good question. And here's what I recommend. What I learned years ago in managing a group is, to an extent, you've got to play to, for lack of better words, the lowest common denominator. So if you're facilitating a group discussion and you're likely to have people who are, dealing with more negative reactions, I think it's important to at least acknowledge those first. The people who are more positively inclined, they're going to stick with you, and they may even find a way to be the ones to help those others address their negative reactions. They'll stick with you, and if they learn something that they're concerned about that they hadn't thought of, well, an educated consumer is your best customer, and try to get everybody at least to a neutral point before you pivot to the positive place. It's one of the lessons I learned years and years ago before I started teaching trusted advisor content. I was certified to teach a program developed by a company called the PAR Group, which is really an extraordinary work on how do you address the varying levels of energy and reactivity. And that's a lesson that I got from them.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Andrea, we have a question, and I'm going to combine a couple of these. And forgive me if I destroy the names here. Nene Shaw, very early on when we were talking about the concerns about leading with putting your worst foot forward, she said, how do you know you were dealing with a skeptic? Because now you may be missing out on creating a good impression. And I want to follow up with something that Franklin just posted about. How about asking what their concerns are at the beginning of the meeting? Can you address just a little bit, like, how do you even know if you're dealing with a skeptical audience?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the short answer ranges anywhere from, well, it depends to not really sure. I mean, sometimes it's a bit of a gamble. You don't know. You can do as much homework as possible in advance. If you're in a sales situation and you've got somebody kind of coaching you in the sale, you might be able to get some information then. You're back. Was there something you were going to add?
Well, I was just going to say, because I wanted to make sure that we addressed Franklin's point about what's your perspective on kind of opening the door and creating the opportunity for skepticism that they may not be showing.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. And I think it also allows you to actually lead with whatever is on their mind, not what you're imagining is on their mind, but start there and go there. And if the answer is no, we're not super concerned, we're really ready, we're interested, we want to learn more about what you do, then go for it by all means. You don't have to be overly humble and overly self-deprecating. That has its own sort of twisted version of high self-orientation. If they're with you, go for it, and then just keep paying attention to or listening for the signs that say, well, they're with you, but then something came up. Okay, pause. Then you can pause, work the concern, continue, and iterate.
Good. And so Ninesh followed up with, can you assume a certain type of prospect is skeptic already?
I think all prospects start skeptical, quite frankly. Back to the Charlie Green quote, people love to buy and hate to be sold. Even if, I think anybody who's in a buying position, and again, whether they're buying product, service, or idea, is, especially if it's product service, is going to come, I think it's safe to assume that they come with some degree of, if not skepticism, a reserve or a little bit of concern about being sold, about being pushed, about being persuaded to do or say something that isn't necessarily in their best interests.
Great. And then as we wrap this up, I'm going to pull it full circle because Franklin asked a question like right at the very beginning. Yeah. He said, what's with the picture of the dog? What does the dog have to do with a skeptical audience?
So the dog has nothing to do with the skeptical audience, but the dog is pulling on like a rope. So part of the description of our webinar, see if I can pull the dog back up, was about the tug of war that we naturally feel or we all too easily get into when we're dealing with other people's skepticism. So more about the rope than the dog.
Fantastic. Andrea, I want to thank you, and I'm going to ask you, I have a vacuum going right outside the door now. If you could just pop up that very last slide with some of the resources, you all will get a copy of these slides. There are many, many resources. We'll have some curated resources that will go out with your email. Andrea, thank you for, as I expected, a wonderfully engaging and very informative session today. Do you have a minute to pull up the slides? I'm not trying to pressure
working on it, but for some reason I'm not capable.
If we
There we
don't
go.
get to it, there we go. Just a reminder, we don't have next month's webinar set up yet. It will be up on the website in the next day or two. I'm going to be back on stage in June talking about how to keep trust alive in relationships when you're not interacting day to day with people. So go to our website. You can find self-led learning. You can access our books. We've got blogs and articles and podcasts and ebooks and on and on and on. And of course, feel free to follow us on social media if you want to get daily tips and pings from us all. So thank you all very much for joining us today. It's been a true pleasure, especially thank you to Andrea. And with that, we will hopefully see you next month. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.